They say brothers are supposed to protect you. In the Holloway bloodline, brothers calculated what a sister and her newborn were worth against a dead man's debt. Amara woke to silence. Not the kind that meant peace, the kind that pressed against the stone walls like a held breath. Sage had been crying 20 minutes ago, the
Give me
thin,
my
hiccuping
baby!
wail
No,
of
the
a
child stays with
2-month-old
me.
who
You
wouldn't
can't
settle.
do this!
Now,
Get back!
I won't let you
nothing.
take him!
She was on her feet before her eyes fully opened, bare feet hitting cold flagstone. The corridor was dark except for the glow spilling from the kitchen hearth. Orange, guttering, wrong for this hour. Someone had stoked the fire long before dawn. Sage's cradle was empty. The swaddling cloth was still warm. Amara ran. Down the corridor, past the washroom, into the kitchen where the hearth fire threw shadows that jumped like living things. But Tehran stood at the back door with Sage bundled under his arm. Not cradled, not held, tucked. The way you carry something you intend to hand off. Breck blocked the archway to the stairs, arms folded, jaw set. He wouldn't look at her. He never could. Not when it mattered. "Give her to me." Her voice came out shredded, barely human. "Can't do that."
We have to
Tehran
move.
shifted Sage
Now.
against
Where
his
are you
ribs.
taking me?
The
Somewhere
baby
safe.
made a small
Hurry.
sound, not a cry.
Stay
a
behind
whimper.
me!
And Amara's wolf,
I won't
dim and muffled as
You're
it had been for
surrounded!
months,
Stay close, I've got
threw
you!
itself against
Take
the
that
inside
at
of her
all
chest
costs!
like a fist
John, I'm
hitting a locked
scared.
door.
She'll save me.
Tehran, give me my daughter. She's not yours anymore. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, factual, like reading terms off a contract. She's settling Dad's debt. The debt. And everyone in Holloway territory knew about Harlan's debt. Decades of drink and ruin, borrowed coin from packs no sane wolf borrowed from, blood oaths sworn over tavern tables that were never honored. Amara had heard the messengers at midnight, the voices that didn't need to shout to be terrifying. Victor Slade's name spoken in whispers that made grown wolves cross the road and bar their doors. The Ashen Pack, the darkest compound in 6 territories, a fortress of black iron buried in a dead forest where broken wolves were reduced to livestock. Wolves went in. What came out, if anything came out, wasn't wolves anymore. She's 8 weeks old. Amara's voice cracked down the center. She's a baby, Tehran. She can't settle a debt. She can't do anything. She's a baby. Victor Slade settles debts in pups or in blood. Tehran's eyes were flat as river stones. You want Breck and me bled out in a ditch? That what you want? She turned to Breck, desperate, begging with everything she had left. Breck, please, you held her the day she was born. You held her and you smiled. Don't let him do this. Breck's jaw tightened. He studied the wall behind her head like the crumbling plaster was the most interesting thing in the room. It's already arranged. I'm her mother. You're an unranked Omega who never shifted. Tehran slung a leather pack over his shoulder. You can't protect her. You can't protect yourself. At least this way she's useful. Useful. Her 2-month-old daughter. Useful. Amara looked past them both, past the kitchen, dimmed through the doorway to the main hall where Harlan Holloway sat in the chair he hadn't left in years. Flagon between his knees, eyes fixed on the dead hearth, jaw slack, the shape of a father with everything inside scooped out. He knew. He had to know. Dad, her voice was a blade scraping bone. Dad, tell them to stop. Harlan lifted his cup, drank, set it down, did not turn his head. Tehran laughed, one short, ugly bark. Who do you think pressed his seal to the writ? The ground shifted. Amara grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her knuckles went white around the rough-hewn wood, and she held on because if she let go, she would collapse. And if she collapsed, Tehran would step over her and walk out the door with her daughter, and that would be the last time she ever saw Sage's face. Cart's coming at first light. Tehran walked past her. Breck followed. Neither looked back. She stood alone in the kitchen, breathing through her teeth, listening to the sound of Sage's muffled whimper growing fainter as Taryn carried her toward the front of the house. Then silence again. That same silence. The kind that would live inside her skull for the rest of her life. Her eyes found the small, painted likeness nailed above the hearthstone. Her mother, Lena, rendered in faded pigment on a scrap of birch panel. Dark gold hair, a half smile. Eyes already tired in the portrait, already fading, already halfway somewhere else. She'd died in a dark pack raid when Amara was 7. No one avenged her. No one even said her name out loud anymore. "I'm sorry," Amara whispered to the painting. "I'm sorry I couldn't—" She didn't finish. Couldn't? Sorry for what? For not being stronger, for not being worth keeping, for growing a daughter inside her body, only to have her carried out the back door like a debt payment wrapped in a wool blanket. She dressed because there was nothing else left to do. A worn linen shift, woolen stockings, boots, the tall ones with the loose lining, a heavy knit tunic with a hole in the left elbow she'd never mended. Her hands moved without her permission, pulling laces, tying points, while her mind repeated one word in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Sage, sage, sage. This was the house where she'd scrubbed her brother's blood from the kitchen flagstones after tavern brawls they started and never finished, where she'd cooked every meal since she was 12 and heard thank you exactly never. Yet where she'd swallowed the bitter brown tonics Taryn brought home from Naira Hale's apothecary. "For your weak constitution," he'd said, "since your wolf won't come in." Little clay vials that tasted like iron filings and turned the world to cotton. She'd taken them for years, obedient, even grateful, because at least someone was trying to fix what was obviously wrong with her. She didn't know yet what was in those vials. She didn't know the word grief root. She didn't know that her wolf hadn't failed to come in. It had been buried alive, one dose at a time, since she was 15 years old. She was 22. She had never shifted, never felt the pull. The other Omegas in the territory whispered that she was broken, that whatever bloodline she came from had thinned to nothing in her, hollowed out, a dead end. Maybe they were right. But she'd still grown a daughter inside her body, nursed her through 6 weeks of sleepless nights, learned the specific pitch of her cry, that meant hungry versus tired versus hold me. And that daughter was alive, and she was somewhere in this house, and that was the only thing in the world that still mattered. She found one thing before she left. Sage's first blanket, pale yellow, soft from washing, small enough to fold twice. She tucked it into the lining of her left boot, pressed her foot down to feel it there, and held that pressure like a heartbeat against her ankle. Then she walked to the kitchen. Gray dawn crept through the window slats like something ashamed of itself. Taryn and Breck sat at the table, between them a pile of coin, counted, stacked, arranged in neat towers of silver and copper. Payment. For an 8-week-old girl who liked low humming and slept best on her mother's chest. Amara stared at the coin. Something inside her went very quiet, not broken, locked, like a door slamming shut on a room full of fire. Harlan hadn't moved. Same chair, same flagon, same hollow vacancy where a father was supposed to be. Hoofbeats and the groan of iron-rimmed wheels on frozen mud. A wagon, heavy, drawn by draft horses built for distance, rolled to a stop outside the front gate. "They're here," Breck said. The knock was 3 sharp beats against oak. Professional, efficient. The knock of a man who had collected people before and saw no reason to be courteous about it. Taryn lifted the bar and opened the door. The man who stepped inside filled the frame. Tall, broad, wrapped in black boiled leather and iron-studded bracers. As a heavy cloak hung from his shoulders, clasped at the throat with the Ashen Pack's sigil. A wolf skull wreathed in dead branches. A scar cut through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. He smelled of tallow, cold steel, and something underneath. Something animal and wrong, like a wolf that had learned to enjoy the hunt too much. His eyes swept the room. The coin, the brothers, the father in the chair, the girl standing by the table, with the bored precision of a man cataloging inventory. Fenris Cade, voice like gravel dragged across a whetstone. Slade sent me. The PUP's already loaded. Already loaded. Sage was already in the wagon. Already swaddled in someone else's arms, or in no one's arms at all. Amara's vision tunneled to a white point. Her knees tried to buckle. She locked them. Fenris turned to her. Circled once, slow, clinical, unhurried. She felt his gaze move across her neck, her wrists, her hips. Not hunger, not cruelty. Assessment. The way you evaluate a thing, not a person. Livestock at market. This the mother? That's her. Taryn didn't gesture. Didn't need to. There was only one person in the room who was shaking. Fenris stopped in front of Amara, tilted his head a half-inch. Slade didn't ask for the mother. She'll cause problems if she stays. Taryn's voice was easy, conversational, a man tying up loose ends. Noise, appeals to the wardens, petitions to the crown. Take her or don't, but if she stays and opens her mouth. She won't. Fenris looked at Amara with the flat, depthless patience of a man who had silenced louder wolves than her. They never do. Not after the first week. He turned toward the door, and his cloak dragged across the threshold. Wagon leaves when I mount. She rides in the cage cart at the back. Amara looked at the kitchen one last time. The table where she'd eaten 10,000 silent meals. The chair where her father sat dissolving. The painted likeness above the hearth. Her mother's face, soft and distant, smiling from a world that no longer existed. Then she pressed her left boot flat against the floor, felt the blanket still there, still warm from her hands, and walked toward the open door. She did not cry. Crying was for women who had given up. And Amara Wren Holloway had not yet, given up. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, past territories she'd never seen and borders she'd never crossed, a column of war horses was already riding. She didn't know this yet. No one did. But something in the old bond, the ancient pull that ran deeper than pack law, deeper than blood, deeper than any debt a broken father could press his seal to, was already turning a king toward the sound of a mother who refused to stop calling her daughter's name. He didn't know her yet. He would. The cage cart had no roof. Rain came down in thin gray needles for the first 3 hours, and Amara sat with her knees drawn to her chest and her face turned away from the 3 other women chained to the opposite bench. None of them spoke. One had stopped blinking somewhere around the 2nd mile. Another kept her hands folded in her lap like she was praying, but her lips never moved. The third was younger than Amara, 16, maybe 17, and she stared at the tree line as though she expected someone to come crashing through the undergrowth and save her. No one came. The road narrowed. The trees changed. Living forest thinning to dead wood, gray trunks stripped of bark, branches reaching overhead like the fingers of drowned women. The air thickened. Wet fur and old iron and something underneath, something that clung to the back of Amara's throat and tasted like fear that had soaked into the earth over years and never dried. The gates appeared through fog. Black iron, 30 feet tall, wolf skulls mounted on the posts. Real ones, yellowed, wired to the bars with rusted chain. The compound behind them was stone and timber, low and sprawling, built to hold things in rather than keep things out. Torches guttered along the walls despite the daylight, as though the dark here was something that had to be fought at every hour. They were pulled from the cart one by one. A guard with a face like a closed fist cut their bindings and shoved them into a line. Amara's wrists were raw where the rope had bitten. She pressed them against her thighs and said nothing. Processing was efficient. A woman with dead eyes and ink-stained fingers recorded each of them in a leather-bound ledger. Name, age, pack of origin, rank. A strip of boiled leather was buckled around Amara's left wrist, stamped with a number. 47, not a name, a position in a count. Their belongings were taken: cloaks, satchels, a wooden comb, a prayer cord. The young girl's locket was pulled from her neck so hard the chain left a welt. Amara stood still while they patted her down, shoulders, waist, pockets. But they did not check her boots. The blanket stayed. Sage's blanket stayed. She pressed her foot flat against the sole and felt it there like a second pulse. He came at dusk. Victor Slade walked the intake line the way a man walks a market stall, unhurried, assessing, already knowing what he'd buy. He was lean, sharp-featured, dressed in black wool and gray fox fur. His movements were smooth and deliberate. No wasted gesture, no raised voice. He didn't need volume. The silence that followed him was louder than any shout. He stopped at Amara, studied her, then reached out with 2 fingers and tilted her chin upward, turning her face toward the torchlight the way you'd angle a horse's jaw to check its teeth. "Holloway's sister." His voice was silk drawn over a blade. "She's got fight in her. Good." A pause. A smile that never reached his eyes. "The dull ones don't last." He moved on. Amara's chin burned where he'd touched it. The holding pen was underground. Stone walls, iron bunks bolted to the floor. 10 other women, most of them sitting in silence, a few asleep or pretending to be. No windows. 1 torch and a bracket by the door, burning low, casting everything in shades of rust and shadow. Amara sat on the farthest bunk, drew her boot off slowly, carefully, when no one was watching, unfolded the pale yellow blanket, small, soft, still carrying the faintest ghost of milk and warmth in her, and pressed it to her face. She breathed in, held it. Sage. She did not sleep. She sat with her back against the cold wall and counted the hours by the guttering of the torch. She listened. She memorized the guard's footsteps. How often? How many? Which direction? She noted the hinges on the door, the distance from her bunk to the corridor, the sound the lock made when it turned. She planned. She didn't cry again. Crying was for people who had given up, and Amara Wren Holloway had not yet, given up. 3 weeks taught Amara the compound's rhythms the way a prisoner learns the shape of a cell by touch. She learned which guards changed at which bell. She learned that the eastern corridor smelled different from the rest, warmer, sweeter, like milk and straw and something alive, and that it was locked with a double bolt and guarded by 2 men who never spoke to the women. She learned that questions about pups were answered with silence or a backhand, depending on who you asked. She asked anyway, every day, carefully, quietly. And in the spaces between labor shifts and mealtimes, she pressed. "Where do the children go? Is there a nursery wing? Have you seen a baby? Small, dark-haired, 2 months old? Nothing. Walls within walls." What she could not learn through asking, she learned through watching. The compound medic, a thin, gray-haired woman named Voss, who wore her apron like armor and never made eye contact, came to the holding pen every morning with a wooden tray of small clay cups, 1 per woman. Bitter brown liquid, thick as pine resin, tasting of iron and crushed bark. "Wellness tonic," Voss called it. "For constitution, drink." Non-negotiable. Every woman drank, every morning. Amara drank. By the end of the first week, she noticed something was wrong. It wasn't dramatic, not a collapse, not a sudden absence, but more like a fog rolling in so slowly you didn't realize you were lost until you turned around and couldn't find the road. Her instincts, already muffled from years of her brother's tonics, grew dimmer still. Sounds she should have heard clearly came through cotton, scents blurred at the edges, and the thread, that low, constant pull in her chest that pointed toward Sage the way a compass needle points north, was fading. Not gone, but dimming. Like a candle flame in a room where someone kept opening the door to let the wind in. By day 14, she had to concentrate to feel it. She'd press her hand flat against her sternum and reach, and it would be there, faint, flickering, the barest tremor of connection. But she had to search for it now. A week ago, it had simply been there, the way her own heartbeat was there. On day 19, as she refused the cup, Voss stared at her, set the cup down on the bunk's edge, left without a word. Fenris Cade arrived within the hour. He filled the doorway the way a boulder fills a riverbed, not with violence, but with the absolute certainty that nothing was getting past him. He crossed the pen in 4 strides, picked up the cup, and stood over Amara's bunk. Open. She kept her mouth shut. He reached down with one hand, enormous, practiced, patient, gripped her jaw, and forced it open the way you'd open a horse's mouth to check for rot. He poured the tonic in, held her jaw closed, waited until she swallowed. Then he left. Same 4 strides, didn't look back. Amara sat on her bunk with the taste of bark and iron coating her tongue and felt the thread to sage flicker once, a guttering, a desperate pulse, and then go nearly still. The realization came cold and clean, like a blade laid flat against her throat. They were trying to make her stop feeling it, not kill the bond, not sever it, just dim it, muffle it until she stopped reaching, until she forgot what she was reaching for, until the thread went so quiet she mistook the silence for absence and stopped fighting. The next morning, Voss brought the cup. Amara took it, drank, opened her mouth to show it was gone. She held the tonic under her tongue for 11 minutes. When the pen was empty and the guards had passed, she spat it into the straw beneath her bunk and rinsed her mouth with water from the basin. That night, the thread pulsed, faint, fragile. But there. She pressed Sage's blanket to her chest and breathed. They could cage her body. But the thread between her and Sage, thin as spider silk, stubborn as iron, they had not yet managed to cut it. She intended to keep it that way. Day 28. The bell came wrong. Not the meal bell, low, single, rusted. Not the shift bell, 2 short strikes. This was a sound Amara had never heard in the compound. 3 rapid peals followed by silence, then 3 more, then shouting. Guards ran past the holding pen with their boots hammering the stone like war drums, buckling sword belts, pulling on gloves. One of them was pale. Another was breathing too fast. The women in the pen went still, the way prey goes still. Through the walls, through the stone, through 28 days of learning every sound this place made, Amara heard something new. Hoofbeats, not a cart, not a supply wagon, war horses, many of them, and moving in formation. The whisper came down the corridor like smoke, passed from guard to prisoner, each voice lower than the last. The Alpha King, Crown Inspection, he's actually here. They were dragged out, all of them. Every woman in the holding pens pulled to her feet, shackled at the wrist, marched into the inspection yard. An open square of packed earth ringed by torch posts and overlooked by the compound's watchtowers. Rain had stopped an hour ago, but the ground was still dark and wet, and the air smelled of iron and cold stone. Stand straight, eyes down. Amara stood in the line with her chains hanging between her wrists and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The gates opened, he entered on foot. Yet that was the first thing she noticed, a king who dismounted before entering a place like this, who chose to walk the same ground as the people inside it. Lucian Cade Blackwood was tall, dark-haired, built like something that had been forged rather than born. Battle scars crossed his jaw and disappeared beneath the collar of his black leather surcoat. The Blackwood sigil, a wolf's head crowned in silver thorns, was stamped into the chest plate he wore over chainmail. His eyes were the color of winter steel, and they moved across the compound with the controlled fury of a man cataloging every violation he intended to answer for. Behind him, a broad, copper-haired man with a sword on each hip, Ronan Steele, his beta. And behind Ronan, a wall of armed soldiers in black and silver, fanning across the yard in silent formation, led by a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the compound walls. Thane Ashford, war general. Lucian walked the line, slow, deliberate. He looked at each woman, not past them, not through them, at them. His jaw was tight. His hands were loose at his sides
No,
in the
the child
specific
stays
way
with
of a
me.
man
You
who was
can't
keeping
do
them open
this!
because
Get back!
the
I won't
alternative
let you
was
take him!
fists. He reached Amara, stopped. The wind shifted, a gust from behind her, carrying her scent forward across the 2 feet between them. He inhaled. His entire body went still. Not tense. Arrested. The absolute frozen stillness of a predator who has caught a scent it has been tracking across years and territories and dreams it refused to name. His eyes locked on hers and did not move. Amara's wolf, muffled, dimming, so nearly smothered under weeks of grief root and years of iron bane, detonated inside her chest. Not a whisper, not a stir, a roar, claws raking the inside of her ribs, tearing through the chemical fog with a violence that made her gasp. One word, over and over, slamming against her skull like a fist against a locked door. Mate, mate, mate. She looked up, met his eyes. Winter Steel staring into
We
her
have to
like
move,
he could see
now.
every
Where are you
bruise,
taking me?
every
Somewhere
stolen
safe.
night,
Hurry!
every hour she'd spent
Stay behind
counting
me!
guard
They're
rotations
coming!
and
I
hiding
won't
tonic
let
under
them!
her tongue.
You're surrounded!
And
Stay
Amara
close!
did
I've
the
got
thing
you!
that changed
Tact at
everything.
all costs!
She didn't
John, I'm
ask to be
scared.
saved.
She'll save me.
She grabbed the chain between her wrists, pulled it taut, and said, "My pup is here. They sold my daughter. Please, she's just a baby." Something moved behind Lucian's eyes, something old and enormous and absolutely certain. That he turned his head, looked directly at Victor Slade, who stood at the edge of the yard in his black wool and gray fox fur, smooth and still as a snake, watching a hawk circle overhead. The temperature of the air dropped. "Bring me the child." Victor Slade opened his mouth. That, Lucian said, was not a request. For the first time in 28 days, Amara Wren Holloway allowed herself to feel something other than survival. She felt fury, and it felt almost like hope. She fought him, not with strategy, not with words, with her body, with everything she had left, which was almost nothing. She twisted against the soldier who guided her toward the gates. She dug her heels into the mud. She clawed at the arm that held her, and she said it once, twice, 3 times, each repetition louder than the last, "I am not leaving without her." Lucian stood between her and the compound. He did not grab her. He did not raise his voice. He blocked her path with his body and said, "You're in no condition to go back in there. My general will find her." His voice was not soft, but it was steady. The kind of steady that came from a man who had made decisions in worse moments than this, and understood that gentleness, right now, would sound like a lie. "You don't know where she is. You don't know what they've—" Thane Ashford has taken fortresses with higher walls than these. He will find your daughter. But you cannot be inside those walls when he does. She stared at him, shaking, rain and sweat and grime on her face, the chain marks on her wrists already darkening to bruise. She stopped fighting. Not because she believed him, because her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground. One arm. Didn't hold her longer than he needed to. Set her upright and stepped back. The ride was long. Amara sat on the bench of a covered wagon, not the cage cart, never again, wrapped in a soldier's cloak that smelled of wood smoke and clean wool. She watched the trees change through the canvas flap, dead forest giving way to living timber. birch, rowan, ancient oaks with trunks wider than the wagon itself. The air thinned and sweetened, and somewhere beneath the numbness in her chest, her wolf, still battered, still dim, registered the shift. Safer ground, old territory. Blackwood Keep materialized through fog like something dreamed into existence. Black stone walls rising from a granite ridge, as wolf-head battlements carved into the parapets, torchlight burning in iron brackets along towers that disappeared into low cloud. It was enormous. It was ancient. It was alive with a power that hummed through the ground like a second heartbeat, and Amara felt it in her bones before she saw it with her eyes. They gave her a room, warm, fire already lit, enormous bed draped in dark fur, a basin of clean water, a window that looked out over a valley she didn't recognize. She sat on the floor. The bed was too soft. The room was too large. The silence was the wrong kind. Not the silence of threat, but the silence of space. And she didn't know what to do with space. Her body understood cages. It did not understand this. She sat with her back against the stone wall and pressed Sage's blanket between her palms and waited. The Ronin steel came at evening bell. He carried a wooden tray, bread, broth, dried fruit, a cup of water. He set it on the floor beside her, not on the table, on the floor, where she was. Then he sat down across from her, back against the opposite wall, and said nothing for a long time. "Thane is the best war general in 6 territories," he said eventually. His voice was low and unhurried, like a man who had learned that calm was more useful than comfort. "If your pup is in that compound, he'll find her." "When?" "When he finds her." She almost smiled. Didn't, but almost. She ate the bread because her body demanded it, and Ronan sat with her until the fire burned low and then left without asking if she was all right. She was grateful for that. The question would have broken something she was holding together with nothing but will. Lucian came at midnight. He didn't knock. The door opened, and he stood in the frame for a moment, reading the room. The untouched bed, the woman on the floor, the blanket in her hands. He entered, closed the door behind him, crossed the room and sat on the floor across from her, back against the wall, knees drawn up, mirror of her position, equal ground. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't tell her it would be all right, didn't speak about the bond that had detonated between them in the inspection yard like a crack of lightning through dead wood. He said, "Tell me about her." Amara stared at him. This man, this king, this wolf whose presence made the stone walls hum, sitting on a floor in the middle of the night asking about a baby he'd never met. "Her name is Sage." Her voice cracked on the second word. She kept going. "No, she was 8 weeks old when they took her. She has dark hair. My mother's chin, I think." A breath. She liked, when I hummed, low notes, she'd go quiet and just listen." Lucian didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't offer hollow reassurance. He listened the way he'd walked that inspection line, completely, deliberately, with his full attention. As though every word she said was something he intended to remember. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, "I know." 2 words. She didn't understand them. But something in the way he said it, not, "I know your pain," or "I know what you're going through," but simply, "I know." As if he had already decided that Sage was real and present and worth the full weight of his attention, made the knot in her chest loosen by a single, aching degree. He stayed until she stopped shaking. Then he left. Dawn came gray and cold through the window, footsteps in the corridor. A knock. Ronan's knock. 2 short raps. He opened the door. His face was different. Not smiling. Ronan didn't seem like a man who smiled easily, but changed. He held a piece of folded parchment. Message from Thane. He handed it to her. Amara unfolded it with fingers that shook so badly she nearly tore the paper. 6 words in a soldier's blunt hand. Found her, bringing her home. She read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Behind Ronan, in the corridor, Lucian stood with his shoulder against the wall. He watched Amara's face as she read it. Watched the way her eyes widened, the way her mouth opened, as the way something that had been clenched inside her for 28 days released all at once like a bowstring cut, and something shifted in him that hadn't moved in years. "She's alive," he said. And Amara pressed her face into both hands and finally, let herself break. Thane Ashford rode through the gates of Blackwood Keep at midday with 40 soldiers behind him, and a bundle held against his chest that he had not entrusted to anyone else for the entire ride. Amara was already in the courtyard. She had been standing there since dawn, since the message, since the moment her hands stopped shaking long enough to lace her boots. She hadn't eaten, hadn't sat. She'd stood at the top of the stone steps with Sage's blanket pressed between her palms and watched the road. Thane dismounted. Well, he was enormous, taller even than Lucian, with a face like weathered granite and hands that could have crushed a man's skull without effort. He crossed the courtyard in long strides, and the bundle in his arms moved. A small sound, a thin, hiccuping cry that Amara would have known from 1,000 miles away, from the bottom of the sea, from the far side of death. He stopped in front of her, looked down at her with eyes that had seen sieges and slaughter and showed nothing, and now showed something. Something careful and almost tender. "She's thin," he said, "but she's strong." He placed Sage in Amara's arms. The world stopped. Sage was lighter than she should have been. Her cheeks were hollow where they'd been round. Her skin was pale, her dark hair matted. And she smelled wrong, like straw and strangers and the compound's dead air. But she was warm. She was breathing. And the instant Amara's arms closed around her, the instant skin touched skin, Sage went quiet. Not asleep, not startled into silence, settled, the way a compass needle settles when it finds north. Amara sank to her knees on the courtyard stone and held her daughter against her chest and did not let go. Hours passed. She was aware of them only as changes in light. Someone draped a cloak over her shoulders. Someone set water beside her. She didn't move. Sage slept against her heartbeat, and Amara breathed her in. Beneath the straw, beneath the wrongness, there, milk and warmth and the specific, irreplaceable scent of her child. Alara Moon arrived in the late afternoon, and she came quietly, a tall woman with silver-white hair and dark, steady eyes, carrying a leather satchel and moving with the unhurried precision of someone who had healed enough broken things to know that gentleness was not optional. She knelt beside Amara and Sage on the floor of the chamber they'd finally coaxed Amara into. She examined Sage first. Careful hands, quiet voice. Malnourished, mildly dehydrated. No injuries, no broken bones. Alara looked at Amara. "She's going to be all right." Then Alara turned to Amara, drew blood with a thin silver needle into a glass vial, held it up to the firelight, tilted it, studied it the way a woman reads a sentence she hopes she's misunderstanding. Her face changed. "There are compounds in your blood." Alara's voice was level, but her hands had gone very still. "Grief root, iron bane. They're used to fracture the maternal bond, to make mothers stop fighting for their pups. They suppress the wolf, dull instinct, sever the connection between a mother and her child at the root." The room went silent. "How long?" Amara's voice was barely a whisper. Alara looked at the vial again. "Based on accumulation levels, months. The iron bane has been in your system far longer, years possibly, since adolescence." Amara looked across the room. Lucian stood by the door, arms at his sides. He was absolutely still, but his eyes, winter steel, unblinking, were not still at all. The wolf behind them was pacing, and the air around him hummed with a fury so controlled it was almost worse than violence. "My brothers arranged it," Amara said. It was not a question. She was remembering the clay vials, the bitter brown tonics. For your weak constitution." Taryn's flat voice. Naira Hale's apothecary. Every morning for 7 years. "The suppression of your wolf has been ongoing since well before your pregnancy," Alara said carefully. "This is why you never shifted, why you never bonded to your pack rank. You weren't broken, Amara. You were being chemically managed." The rage that came was not hot. It was cold. It was the specific, crystalline cold of a woman who had spent her entire life believing she was less strong, less worthy, less wolf, and understood at last that the deficit had never been hers. It had been manufactured, dosed into her every morning by the people who were supposed to protect her, designed to keep her small and quiet and controllable, and she had thanked them for it. Lucian spoke, quietly, to Ronan, who stood just inside the doorway. "Add it to the charges." 3 words. No heat. The voice of a king who is building something, not a rage, but a reckoning, and intended it to be thorough. Amara looked down at Sage. Her daughter's hand had curled around her smallest finger, tiny, warm, holding on. She pressed her lips to Sage's forehead and made a promise so quiet no one else could hear it. "I'm going to make sure no one ever does this to anyone again." Alara called it restoration. It felt like being unmade. The first treatment was a tincture, clear, sharp, tasting of white birch and something mineral that burned all the way down. Alara administered it at sundown with steady hands and steady eyes, and a warning that was not dressed in kindness, because kindness would have been dishonest. "The grief root and iron bane have been in your system for years. Purging them will not be gentle. Your wolf has been buried under chemical suppression since you were a child. When she surfaces, and she will surface, it will feel like everything inside you is trying to come apart at once. And if I stop, then you stay as you are, muffled, half of what you should be." Alara held her gaze. "That is not a life. That is a leash." Amara drank. Night 1 was fever. It began within the hour. A slow, rolling heat that started in her bones and pushed outward through muscle and skin until the sheets beneath her were soaked, and her teeth chattered so hard she bit the inside of her cheek and tasted blood. The room tilted, swam. She shook with a violence that rattled the bed frame against the stone wall. Sage slept 3 feet away in a cradle that Alara had placed within Amara's line of sight. Close enough to see, close enough to hear. Alara sat beside the cradle with her hands folded, watching them both with the patient vigilance of a woman who understood that healing sometimes looked indistinguishable from dying. Amara shook through the night and watched her daughter breathe and did not close her eyes. Night 2 was the wolf. It began as pressure, deep, internal, tectonic. Something enormous stirring beneath years of chemical sediment, pushing upward through layers of suppression that cracked and groaned like ice breaking on a frozen river. Amara felt her wolf for the first time. Not the muffled flicker she'd learned to mistake for the whole of it, but the real thing, massive and ancient and absolutely furious, but clawing through the wreckage of what had been done to her with a force that turned every nerve in her body to fire. The pain was a scream that never quite exited her throat. She arched on the bed, fingers twisted in the sheets, jaw locked. Lucian was there. She didn't know when he'd come in. He sat at the bedside, not on the bed, not hovering, not reaching, sitting, present. "What do you need?" She couldn't speak. She reached out blindly and grabbed his hand. He held it, didn't flinch at the strength of her grip. And it was strong, stronger than an Omega's grip should have been, because whatever was inside her was not what anyone had told her she was. He held her hand through every hour of that night and did not let go. Night 3 was the worst, her body convulsed. But the wolf, 22 years of imprisonment compressed into hours of eruption, tore through suppression after suppression, each layer breaking with a pain that was specific and distinct, like peeling burnt cloth from a wound 1 inch at a time. She cried, she screamed, she called for her mother who was dead, she whispered Sage's name like a prayer, over and over, a rhythm that kept her tethered to the world when everything inside her was trying to fly apart. Alara worked through the night, cool cloths, steadying tinctures, hands that knew when to press and when to pull away. And Lucian's voice, low and steady, through the dark. You're still here, still fighting. Don't stop. Not comfort, not a promise that it would end, just the truth that she was still in it, still moving, still alive. Spoken by a man who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could offer a person in agony was the simple confirmation that they had not yet been destroyed. She held his hand until her knuckles ached and his fingers were white, and neither of them let go. Morning of day 4. Silence. Not the silence of the compound, not held breath, not threat. This silence was clean, open. The silence after a storm passes and the air smells new. Amara opened her eyes. Her wolf was there. Not clawing, not raging, not muffled behind cotton and chemical fog. There, enormous and golden and steady as bedrock, filling every corner of her chest with a presence so complete, it was like discovering a room in her own body she'd never been allowed to enter. She breathed in, felt her senses sharpen, the fire in the hearth, and the grain of the stone walls, the wind beyond the window carrying pine and rain and distant snow. She could smell Alara's birch bark salve. She could smell the iron in the old torch brackets. She could smell Lucian, cedar and steel and something warm beneath it that made her wolf press forward with a recognition so absolute it didn't need a name. And she could smell Sage. From across the room, from the cradle in the corner, milk and warmth and the particular sweetness of her daughter's skin, the thread that had flickered and dimmed and nearly been extinguished, roared open like a river breaking through a dam. Sage made a sound, small, reaching. Her hands stretched toward Amara from Alara's arms. Amara crossed the room and took her daughter and the bond thread. The bond thread was not a flicker now, not a pulse, a river. Wide and rushing and so strong it hummed in her teeth. She held Sage against her chest and felt her daughter's heartbeat align with hers and understood, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that no one would ever separate them again. Not chemically, not physically, not by law or force or cruelty. The thread was a river and the river was hers, and she would drown anyone who tried to dam it. She looked at Lucian. He stood by the door where he'd been all night, every night, 4 nights of a woman's agony witnessed without flinching. He was watching them both, mother and daughter, golden thread and rushing bond. And his face held something she hadn't seen before, not the controlled fury of the compound, not the steady command of the king. Something quieter, something that looked, if she had to name it, like awe. "Ma, thank you," she said. He shook his head once. "You did that," he answered. "Not me." She was whole. For the first time in her life, or the first time she could remember, she was entirely, ferociously whole. And the men who had spent years making her less were about to find out what that meant. 3 weeks of something Amara did not yet have a name for. Not safety. She'd stopped trusting that word years ago. Not peace. Her body still woke at every sound, still catalogued exits, still counted footsteps in the corridor. But something, a loosening, a slow, tentative unclenching of the fist she'd made of herself in order to survive. She trained with Alara every morning, learning her wolf, not the muffled ghost she'd lived with for years, but the real one, golden and enormous and still learning the shape of its own strength. and she ran the keep's perimeter at dawn. She ate full meals and felt her body remember what it was to be fed properly. Sage was gaining weight, sleeping through the night, reaching for everything within arm's length with the fierce determination of a child who had decided the world owed her its full attention. Amara laughed for the first time on a Tuesday. Sage had grabbed Ronan's braid during a council briefing and refused to let go, and the look on the beta's face, a man who had fought border wars reduced to negotiating with a 4-month-old, cracked something open in Amara's chest that she hadn't known was sealed. She laughed, short, surprised, almost rusty. Across the room, Lucian looked up from the map table. He didn't smile. But he watched her the way a man watches a fire catch in a hearth he thought had gone cold, like he was memorizing the exact moment it happened. Then the criers came, town criers in every market square in 6 territories, reading from broadsheets printed on fine paper and distributed by riders who moved too fast
Give me my
and too
baby!
No,
coordinated
the child
for
stays with
anything
me.
but
You
organized
can't do
effort.
this!
Get back!
Tehran and
let
Breck
you take
Holloway's
it!
names on every page, their words read aloud to crowds who had never heard of Amara and had no reason not to believe 2 grieving brothers begging for their sister's return. Ronan brought the broadsheet to the war room and read it aloud with the flat, controlled voice of a man delivering intelligence he found personally revolting. Our sister suffered a difficult birth and was deeply unstable. The Alpha King removed her and her infant child from a care arrangement without the family's knowledge or consent. We are not political actors. We are not enemies of the crown. We are brothers who want their sister home. We just want our family back. Amara stood at the far end of the war room with Sage asleep on her shoulder. She listened to every word. Her face didn't move. Ronan continued. 3 high territorial council members had sent formal inquiry to Blackwood Keep. 2 more were publicly suggesting a neutral return. Amara and Sage placed with an independent pack while the matter was investigated.
We have to move.
The implication
now.
was
Where
clear.
are you taking me?
The Alpha
Somewhere
King
safe.
had
Hurry.
overstepped, taken a woman
Stay
and
behind
child
me!
by
They're
force.
coming!
The Crown's
I won't
authority was being
surrender!
questioned.
You're
and
surrounded!
Taryn had
Stay
handed
close!
the
I've got
doubters
you!
exactly the weapon
Take
they
that at
needed.
all costs!
They sold
John, I'm
Sage.
scared.
You're safe.
Amara's voice was extraordinarily calm. They poisoned me for years. They handed me to Victor Slade in the back of a cage cart. And they are weeping on broadsheets. Lucian stood at the map table, arms folded. He recognized that calm. It was not the calm of defeat. It was the specific, dangerous stillness of a wolf in the instant before it charges, muscles locked, weight forward, every fiber aimed. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She looked at him. "I want to stand in front of every council member and every territory witness in existence and tell the truth." He didn't hesitate. Not a breath. Not a pause. "Then that's what we do." The night before the council session, Amara sat on the edge of her bed in the firelight, brushing Sage's hair with a wooden comb Alara had carved for her. Sage batted at the comb. It missed. Tried again. The room smelled of wood smoke and the lavender oil Amara had started using to help Sage sleep. A knock. Lucian's knock. One firm rap. Then silence. Then the door opening only after she answered. He stood in the doorway. Firelight caught the scar along his jaw, the silver wolf sigil at his collar. His eyes moved from Amara to Sage and back, and something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but settled, the way stone settles when it finds its foundation. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anyone a performance of pain. You just tell them what happened." She looked at him for a long time, the man who had sat on the floor with her, who had held her hand through 3 nights of agony and credited her for surviving it. Who had asked about Sage before he'd asked about the bond. Who had never, and not once, treated her like something he'd claimed. "Why are you doing all of this?" He held her gaze. "Because you're mine." Then softer, like a door opening onto a second room behind the first. "And because what happened to you was wrong. Both things are true." Both things are true. She turned the words over in her mind and found no trap in them, no ownership dressed as love, no condition, just a man standing in a doorway, telling her that fate and justice were not the same thing, and that he would fight for both. She nodded. He left. She put Sage down in the warm bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and whispered, "Watch what your mother does tomorrow, sweetheart." She wore deep amber, the color of old gold, of autumn fields, of the wolf she had only just learned lived inside her. The gown was simple, no jewels, no crown, and no ornamentation. She carried nothing but herself and Sage's blanket folded into the inner pocket of her coat, pressed against her ribs where no one could see it, and she could always feel it. She and Lucian walked into Blackwood's great hall together, side by side, not his hand on her arm, not guided, not led, together. The hall was enormous, vaulted stone ceilings, iron chandeliers burning with 100 candles, wolf-head banners hanging from the rafters in black and silver. Every seat was filled. Council members in their formal robes, territory representatives from 6 packs, nobles, witnesses, scribes with ink-stained fingers recording every breath. The air was thick with tension, and the sharp animal undercurrent of wolves who could feel the significance of what was about to happen in their bones. 2 chairs waited at the front. At the throne, Lucian's, carved from black oak and crowned with the Blackwood sigil, and beside it, a council chair. Simple, unadorned, equal in position. Amara sat in the council chair. Her choice. She was not here as a queen. She was here as a witness. The doors opened again. Taryn and Breck Holloway entered, flanked by 2 men in legal robes who carried leather folios and the practiced expressions of professionals paid to make cruelty look reasonable. Taryn saw her, stumbled. Not from fear, from fury. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed because he had expected the woman in that chair to be hollow-eyed and shaking, the broken Omega he'd spent a lifetime manufacturing. And what he found instead was something he did not recognize, something that looked back at him without flinching. Victor Slade was brought in last, shackled at the wrists and ankles, iron collar at his throat, escorted by 4 of Thane Ashford's soldiers. He was calm. He was always calm. He surveyed the hall with the patient disinterest of a man who believed himself untouchable, and Amara watched him and felt nothing. He was not the wound. He was the weapon. The men who'd placed her in his hands sat 20 feet away, adjusting their cuffs. Alara Moon presented the evidence first. She stood before the council with glass vials and parchment charts, and spoke in the precise, unhurried voice of a healer who understood that facts, delivered clearly, were more devastating than anger. Chemical analysis of grief root and iron bane. Dosing timelines reconstructed from blood accumulation levels. Suppression records showing systematic wolf burial beginning at age 15 and continuing through pregnancy and postpartum. The hall went cold. Council members who had come prepared to broker a neutral compromise sat very still in their chairs. Taran stood. She was unstable. We were protecting her from herself. Amara rose. The hall went absolutely silent. Not the silence of courtesy, the silence of an entire room holding its breath. She spoke without notes, without trembling, without performing grief for the benefit of people who had never earned the right to witness it. She told them about the night Sage was taken, the empty cradle, the warm swaddling cloth, Taryn at the door with her daughter bundled under his arm like a parcel. She told them about the cage cart and the dead trees and the black iron gates, about the compound medic and the daily wellness doses and the slow, grinding horror of feeling the thread to her daughter dim like a candle guttering in a draught. She told them about day 19, when Fenris Cade held her jaw open and poured the tonic down her throat, about hiding the dose under her tongue, about the inspection yard and the chains, and the man who stopped walking when the wind shifted. She told them about the floor of Blackwood Keep, About a king who sat across from her at midnight and said, "Tell me about her." About 4 nights of agony while the chemicals left her body and the wolf they'd buried for 22 years clawed its way back to the surface. About grabbing a man's hand in the dark and feeling for the first time that someone was holding on. "I am not your evidence of instability," she said. Yeah, her voice carried to every corner of the hall without effort. "I am evidence of what happens when women are quietly, chemically, systematically destroyed by the men who are supposed to protect them." Taryn broke. The careful mask, the grieving brother, the concerned family man, came off like a scab ripped from a wound that had never healed because it was never meant to. "You were nothing!" His voice was a snarl. "A failed Omega who couldn't even hold a pack bond. We were managing a liability." "You were managing a threat," Amara said. "There's a difference." The shift came without warning. It rose from the center of her chest like a tide, not violent, not forced, but inevitable, the way dawn is inevitable after a long enough night. Her wolf surged forward through bone and muscle and skin, and Amara didn't fight it. She let it come. She let herself become what she had always been, and had never been allowed to be. She stood in the great hall on 4 legs, enormous, dark golden, the color of late autumn oak and old honey. Her fur rippled in the candlelight. She was larger than any Omega on record, larger than most alphas, and the ancient bloodline that Taryn's tonics had spent 7 years burying announced itself in every line of her, in the breadth of her shoulders and the depth of her chest and the steady, molten gold of her eyes. The hall erupted. Gasps. Chairs scraping. A council elder gripping the arm of his seat. Ronan Steele at the door went very still, then smiled. The first real smile Amara had ever seen on his face. Sage, in Alara's arms at the front of the hall, had looked up at the enormous golden wolf that had replaced her mother, and clapped. Both hands, open-palmed, the delighted applause of a child who understood nothing about councils or bloodlines or justice and knew only that something wonderful was happening and she wanted to be part of it. Taryn fell to his knees, not in reverence. His legs simply failed him. The thing he had spent years suppressing, the wolf he'd kept caged with clay vials and bitter tonics and the constant grinding cruelty of telling a woman she was less than she was, stood before him at its full height, and his body understood, before his mind did, that he had lost. Breck went pale as bone. He did not move. He did not speak. He stared at the golden wolf with the expression of a man watching the consequences of his own cowardice arrive on 4 legs. But Lucian shifted beside her. Not before her, not in front of her, beside her. Massive black wolf, silver-scarred, the Blackwood King in his true form, and he stood at her flank like an equal, like a partner, like a man who had never once considered standing anywhere else. The sentencing was swift. Victor Slade, permanent imprisonment in the sunken cages, the deepest cells beneath the Iron Court, where no light reached and no appeal was heard. His compound seized, his wolves disbanded, his name struck from every territorial register. Fenris Cade, stripped of wolf rank. The bond between him and his wolf severed by council decree, a punishment so rare it had not been invoked in 40 years. Permanent exile to the territories beyond the Ashfall Wastes, Taryn and Breck Holloway, stripped of name, pack, and protection. A banished to unclaimed fringe territory where no pack would shelter them, no town would trade with them, and no wolf would call them brother. The Holloway name struck from the registry, their bloodline disowned. Harlan Holloway, declared unfit alpha father by unanimous council vote. Land seized, assets dissolved. The house where Amara had cooked 10,000 silent meals and swallowed 7 years of poison given to the crown for redistribution. The chief counselor turned to Amara, who had shifted back and stood in her amber gown with her chin raised and her hands still. The Crown offers execution rights over Tehran and Breck Holloway, as is the right of the wronged party under ancient pack law. Do you accept? The hall waited. Amara looked at Taryn. He was still on his knees, smaller than she remembered, smaller than he'd ever been. No, she said. Living without a name or a pack is its own kind of sentence. I won't carry their deaths. She paused, looked at Sage, who was chewing on Alara's braid with cheerful determination. I'm carrying Sage. She's a queen, someone in the hall whispered, and Sage, who did not know what a queen was, only knew that her mother was the biggest, most golden wolf she had ever seen, and laughed. The great hall emptied slowly, the way water drains from a basin, voices receding, footsteps fading, until the stone corridors held nothing but torchlight and silence. Amara sat on the steps outside with her coat wrapped around her shoulders, and Sage asleep in her lap, one small hand curled around the amber fabric at her mother's collar. Lucian found her there, sat beside her without a word, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. And not quite. The space between them was a question he had never once tried to answer for her. It's over, she said. The trial is over, he agreed. The rest is just beginning. She looked at him, really looked. Not at the king, not at the wolf, at the man who had sat on a stone floor at midnight and asked about a baby he'd never met, who had held her hand through 4 nights of fire and credited her for surviving it, who had said both things are true and meant it. I need to tell you something. Tell me. I think I'm choosing you, not because of the bond, because of who you are. He exhaled. Long, slow, shaking at the edges, like a breath he'd been holding since the inspection yard, since the compound, since the moment he'd scented her and understood that the woman fate had chosen for him was standing in chains and asking him to save her daughter instead of herself. Good, he said, because I've been terrified you wouldn't. 8 months later, the Holloway house came down. Amara watched them demolish it herself, stood in the field with Sage on her hip while the roof collapsed and the walls folded inward, and the kitchen where she'd swallowed 7 years of poison became rubble and dust. In its place, she built Sage Hollow, warm stone, wide windows, training yards, and a nursery wing, and rooms where healers worked in quiet, steady light. 12 wolves and their pups in the first cohort, women pulled from dark packs, women whose bonds had been chemically severed, how women who arrived hollow-eyed and shaking and were met at the gate by someone who understood because she had been them. The Sage Accord passed the High Council unanimously. Chemical wolf suppression criminalized across all territories. Mandatory registration for unregistered omegas. A framework for PUP bond protection that carried penalties severe enough to make even the border packs comply. On the balcony of Blackwood Keep, Lucian leaned against the stone rail and said, "The council wants to know when we're making this official." "Ask me properly, then." He went to one knee on the cold stone. Behind him, Ronan held Sage, who watched with enormous eyes. She said yes before the question was finished. The crown was silver and dark amber, old Blackwood iron fused with Holloway gold, a jeweler's tribute to 2 bloodlines meeting. Alara braided her hair. Sage was the flower girl. She ate half the petals. Ronan walked Amara to the great hall doors. Ready? I was born ready. Then, no, I was born and then I became ready. That's better. The vows were theirs, written together, spoken aloud, followed by a wolf howl that rose from every soldier and pack member in the hall until the stone walls shook with it. That night, Sage slept between them in the great bed. Amara lay in the dark, listening to her daughter breathe, feeling Lucian's warmth at her back. "You know what I keep thinking?" she said. "Tell me." "I keep thinking about the version of me still in that compound, still counting hours, still holding a blanket." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "And I want to go back and tell her, it's coming, hold on." 2 years later, at the Sage Hollow training yard, Afternoon sun slanting through the pines. Amara stood at the fence and watched a young Omega named Syrah, 20 years old, dark-haired, trembling, complete her first full shift. The wolf that emerged was dark gray and solid and shaking with the newness of itself. And Syrah stood on 4 legs in the training yard, with her eyes wide and her body whole for the first time in her life. Her pup, a boy, 3 years old, recovered from a dark pack compound 3 months ago, pushed through the fence slats and ran to her. He buried his face in gray fur and held on. Amara watched them, felt Lucian's hand find hers. "How many this year?" he asked. 43. 43 wolves who were told they were nothing, 43 who found out they weren't. She looked at him. Yet he was watching her the way he had always watched her. Like the world had rearranged itself the moment she entered it, and he had never quite stopped being grateful. "Sage is going to want to train with the senior pack by next year," he said. "Absolutely not." "She's your daughter." "Exactly. That's why absolutely not." He laughed. She leaned into him. Out on the field, 43 wolves breathed free. Her brothers had ripped her pup away and handed her to the darkest pack alive. They thought they were disposing of a problem. They didn't know they were forging a queen, and setting loose the one wolf in the world whose love was strong enough to burn their world down and build something better in the ash.